The last thing Callum Reed expected to give away that afternoon was the only meal he and his daughter had left. He had spent the entire morning counting coins beside an overdue electricity notice, calculating whether a single loaf of bread could stretch until Friday, and pretending not to notice when his 8-year-old daughter, Maisie, quietly said she wasn't hungry. Yet, when he saw a tired woman sitting alone outside the neighborhood grocery store, dressed in a faded coat, staring at the ground as if the whole world had forgotten her, Callum broke his sandwich in half. He handed her the larger piece before he even knew her name. What he did not know was that the woman accepting his last meal was not homeless, unemployed, or abandoned. She was Sloane Whitaker, the powerful chief executive of a billion-dollar company. She had disguised herself as poor for one day to answer a question money had never been able to solve: does kindness still exist when nobody is watching? Callum had not always lived one unpaid bill away from disaster. 3 years earlier, he worked as a maintenance supervisor, earning enough to keep food in the refrigerator and take Maisie to the park every Sunday. But his wife, Lenora, died after a sudden illness, leaving Callum to carry a grief he rarely allowed anyone to see. He learned how to braid hair by watching videos before sunrise. He packed school lunches with handwritten notes, even when those lunches contained little more than crackers and sliced apples. Whenever thunderstorms frightened Maisie, he would sit beside her and whisper that courage did not mean being unafraid. It meant staying gentle, even when life had given you every reason to become hard. For a while, he managed. Then, the warehouse changed ownership, positions were cut, and Callum was dismissed with little warning. Since then, he had taken whatever temporary work he could find, repairing fences, unloading trucks, and fixing appliances for neighbors who sometimes paid him with groceries instead of money. On that Wednesday morning, Callum walked Maisie to school beneath a pale blue sky. Maisie wore a backpack with a broken zipper and shoes that were slightly too small, though she never once complained. At the school gate, she hugged him tightly and reminded him that her class was having a family lunch on Friday. Every child was supposed to bring a parent and something homemade. Callum smiled and promised he would be there. He did not tell her that he had a crucial job interview scheduled at the exact same time, or that there was almost no food at home to prepare. He simply watched her disappear into the school building, then turned toward the center of town, a folder of resumes tucked beneath his arm and hope wearing thin inside his chest. Across the city, Sloane Whitaker stood before a wall of glass on the 38th floor of Whitaker Global. At 41, she was one of the most respected executives in the country. She lived in a silent penthouse, traveled in chauffeured cars, and owned more than she had time to use. Yet, success had gradually surrounded her with yes people. Recently, Sloane discovered that her company's massive charity program, designed to support struggling families, had lost most of its funds to administrative costs and glossy advertising. The actual families had received almost no lasting help. When Sloane confronted her leadership team, they offered only polished charts and excuses. None of them seemed ashamed. The report disturbed her deeply. Her own mother had once cleaned hotel rooms and skipped meals so Sloane could attend school. Sloane remembered standing in food lines as a child, wearing donated clothes. She had built her empire to escape that helplessness, but somewhere along the way, she had begun treating poverty as a figure on a spreadsheet instead of a human struggle. Determined to see the truth, she refused her usual security team. She borrowed old clothes, left her jewelry behind, and took a bus across town alone. The experiment began badly. At a cafe, customers avoided looking at her. A manager asked her to leave. One man dropped a coin near her shoes without making eye contact, walking away as though generosity meant never having to look at the person receiving it. By midday, Sloane felt embarrassed by how much the cold treatment affected her. She knew a single phone call would bring her private chauffeur, but real poverty offered no such escape. That realization weighed heavily on her as she sat outside a modest grocery store. Callum reached the same store shortly after noon. His morning had produced only rejections. He had used his final few dollars to buy a loaf of discounted bread, a small jar of peanut butter, and a banana. Sitting on a bench outside, he prepared 2 sandwiches. One was for himself, the other was for Maisie's after-school snack, which he wrapped carefully in a napkin and placed inside his worn backpack. Then, he noticed Sloane sitting several feet away. She looked exhausted, her hair tied back without care, with a strange emptiness in her expression. Callum had seen that look in his own mirror during the dark months after his wife died, the look of someone trying to remain invisible because being noticed might cause the pain to spill over. Without thinking twice, Callum stood up, walked over, and offered her half. Sloane hesitated. She had expected indifference, perhaps pity, but not genuine generosity from a man whose own clothes were frayed. She asked if he was sure. Callum smiled, saying that food always tasted better when it was shared. As they ate, Sloane asked him why he would feed a stranger when he clearly didn't have much himself. Callum shrugged. "Having little is exactly why I understand what hunger feels like," he said. He shared how, after his wife passed, neighbors brought meals for a couple of weeks, but then everyone returned to their busy lives. "A stranger's kindness can't solve every problem," Callum said gently. "But sometimes, it gives a person enough strength to survive just one more day." Sloane felt a deep wave of shame. Sitting beside Callum, she realized her corporate programs had completely lost touch with the very people they were meant to help. Callum asked Sloane if she had somewhere safe to go. She lied, saying she was looking for work and had recently lost her home. Callum didn't doubt her. He pulled a resume from his folder, wrote an address on the back, and handed it to her. It was a local community center that provided meals and employment support. Then, he handed her his remaining bus pass. Sloane stared at it in disbelief. Callum would need that pass to collect Maisie from school. When she pointed this out, he shrugged it off. "I can walk. The school is only a few miles away, and the weather is beautiful." Before she could say anything, Callum's phone rang. It was Maisie's school. She had felt dizzy during class and was waiting in the nurse's office. Panic replacing every other emotion, Callum hurriedly gathered his things. Sloane tried to return the bus pass, but he refused, turning and sprinting down the street under the hot afternoon sun. Sloane remained on the bench for a long time. In her hand, the plastic bus pass felt heavier than any corporate award she had ever received. She spent the rest of the day visiting the community center Callum had written down, listening quietly to the real struggles of families and laid-off workers, without ever revealing her name. Meanwhile, Callum reached Maisie's school 40 minutes later, drenched in sweat and breathless. The nurse explained that Maisie had skipped breakfast. When Callum opened his backpack to give her the saved sandwich, he found it completely crushed. He began to apologize, his voice breaking. Maisie looked at the ruined sandwich, then at her father's exhausted face. She wrapped her small arms around him and whispered, "I know you're trying, Daddy." When they finally got home, their landlord was waiting at the door with another notice. They had 5 days to pay the remaining rent, or they would be evicted. Callum quietly folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket before Maisie could see. The next morning, Callum went to an interview for a maintenance job. The interview lasted barely 12 minutes. The manager seemed distracted, asking if his responsibilities as a single father would interfere with shifts. Callum answered honestly that Maisie always came first. By the manager's cold nod, Callum knew he wouldn't get the job. As he walked out, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. An assistant stepped out and asked Callum to come with her, mentioning the woman from the grocery store. "Is she safe?" Callum asked immediately. The assistant smiled and assured him she was. The car brought Callum to the towering headquarters of Whitaker Global. He was taken straight to the top floor. There, in a massive glass conference room, stood Sloane Whitaker, no longer wearing the faded coat, but a flawless, tailored navy suit. Callum stopped in the doorway, a deep hurt crossing his face as he realized he had been deceived. Sloane explained everything, apologizing sincerely for lying to him. She admitted that his selflessness had taught her more about dignity than a lifetime in executive boardrooms. But Callum was not easily impressed. "Was this all just a test to you?" he asked, his voice calm but sharp. "Poverty isn't a costume you can wear for a day and take off before dinner. Struggling people don't need to be lessons for the wealthy." They need fair opportunities, stable wages, and respect. What changes once your guilt passes? Sloane didn't defend herself. Instead, she slid a set of documents across the table. She had suspended the company's failed charity campaign and was redirecting those millions into a direct assistance fund for employees' rent, childcare, and training. She offered Callum a job to run this new division. She needed someone who understood real hardship to inspect working conditions and ensure aid went directly to families instead of marketing budgets. The salary was more money than Callum had ever seen. Callum looked at the papers and agreed, but on two strict conditions: the role must carry genuine executive authority, and the local community center must receive permanent, quiet funding, with absolutely no promotional cameras allowed. Sloane agreed instantly. The change didn't happen like magic, but it was real. Callum paid his rent, bought Maisie shoes that actually fit, and filled their pantry. Yet, he remained the same grounded man. At Whittaker Global, he became famous for bypassing executive dining rooms to eat lunch with the custodians, security guards, and warehouse staff, listening to the problems others ignored. Sloane changed, too. She stopped measuring success by corporate donations and started measuring it by human impact. She cut executive bonuses to fund employee programs, and despite criticism from some wealthy investors, her company's productivity and loyalty soared. Months later, on a beautiful Friday afternoon, Sloane attended Maisie's school family lunch. Callum had prepared fresh sandwiches and a homemade cake that tilted slightly to one side. Maisie proudly introduced Sloane to her classmates as the friend who shared Daddy's lunch. To Maisie, the beautiful part of the story was simply that two hungry people sat on a bench, and neither had to eat alone. Near the end of the afternoon, Sloane asked Callum if he ever regretted giving away half of his very last meal. Callum looked at Maisie, who was laughing in the golden sunlight, and smiled. "It wasn't my last meal after all," he said. "It was the first meal of a completely new life." Sloane realized then that Callum had saved her long before she helped him. His sandwich had cost almost nothing. Yet, it had forced a powerful woman to remember who she had once been and decide who she still wanted to become. Years later, that simple wooden bench still stands outside the grocery store. Whittaker Global offered to replace it with a modern marble one, but Callum refused. Instead, a small brass plaque was placed beside it, carrying a simple quote chosen by Maisie: "Share what you can. Especially when it feels like you have nothing." And today, if you pass by that bench, you might see strangers sitting together, opening their lunch bags, and dividing whatever they have into two equal halves, proving that real wealth is never measured by what we keep, but by what we are willing to give. Because when giving costs us something, it changes who we are. If Callum's kindness inspired you, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Comment the word kindness if you believe one small act can change someone's life. Your support helps us bring more stories that remind the world compassion still exists.